young kids.
All right, good evening, everybody. Lots of side conversations here. So this is the August 18th, 2021 regular meeting of the Oyster River Cooperative School Board coming to order. We have a little bit of an unusual sequence of the agenda today because we have a public hearing at the front of the meeting. And so just for everybody involved, when we get to the public hearing part, we're going to be talking specifically about use of the Facilities Development Capital Reserve Fund, and then we'll have open public comments after that. So, Dr. Morse, let's, I guess before I turn to you, can I have a motion to open the public hearing? Brian.
Motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
And a second from Denise. All in favor? 7 in favor. So we're going to go into public hearing. Dr. Morse.
Very good. I'm going to ask Sue to join me at the podium. So the public hearing is basically to inform the public that there's possibility that the board would want to use funds from the Facilities Development Capital Reserve account. That's an obligation and policy, and so I'll let Sue take it from there.
So I believe I included in your packet the balance in that fund. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. And there was discussion about withdrawing $200,000 from that account. It was somewhere around 479, am I correct?
459.
459.
946.
Right. So as agents of that expendable trust fund, you have the authority to expend those funds. And you have to have a public hearing in order to do that, so that's what this is all about.
And the purpose of using the funds
Is to supply air conditioning to, I believe it's the science labs, in addition to what you've already approved, which is for the tower, correct? Third floor of the tower.
So the motivation behind this is that the temperatures in the high school, I mean, last year I had to call heat day because there was a heat advisory, and the third floor of the high school was at 97 degrees, and if we had had students in that temperature would have been higher. The elementary schools concurrently were someplace in the mid-80s, and of course the old middle school was running at about 95 that particular day, because Jim Rozicki can monitor the temperatures throughout the district. And I know that particular call was controversial because it's maybe the first time I ever used it, but to bring students into school when the temperature that was that high would have been counterproductive. And so that drove us down the path of accelerating our plan to air condition the high school, because the new middle school will be both heat and cooled from the well system that we've put in. But the high school continues to be, would continue to be particularly problematic. So the board has already approved putting air into the third floor of the tower. And Jim's put together a plan where we would attack the second and first floor there. But the second most hot area where air just collects is the science wing. So this public hearing is basically to answer any questions anybody has from the public or from the board. And that would be our intent on utilizing the funds. Jim, did I miss anything? Okay. So,
Any other questions?
we open to questions.
Any questions or comments from the public? All right. We have a motion to close the public hearing then?
So moved.
Motion by Al, second by Brian. All those in favor? The public hearing is closed. All right.
Thank you.
And we will circle back to that item later in the agenda. So
Thank you, Sue.
our next item is the approval of the agenda. We will have a non-meeting at the end, which I hope will be brief. Any other changes to the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda from Tom, second from Denise. All those in favor? 7 in favor. The agenda is approved. All right, so now we are up to public comment, and we have a new aspect to public comment tonight. We had tried red light, green light in the past. To make this a little bit easier, Alexander has given us an on-screen timer that looks like that. So, so we know where we are in the process. I know there's only a couple people tonight, so this isn't a big deal, but we're going to try it out tonight so I can get practice with it. So, anybody for public comment?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jill Papero from Lee, and just have 4 or 5 bullet points I wanted to make quickly. I once again wanted to ask if we could exclude the PEP program from the mask mandate for K through 12 schools, just because there's a lot of early intervention for speech going on there, particularly my daughter. So I was hoping that could be considered. And then also on the mask topic, I was hoping that although we're going to have masks in the building, if we could incorporate mask breaks for the students while they're inside, maybe seated at their desks once in a while, like half the classrooms. I don't know, we could figure out a plan so they're not always sitting in their masks. And I'm also going to ask that the middle schoolers and the high schoolers be able to use their lockers starting on the first day. And then just wanted to once again ask for those realistic and obtainable gates to be set up for when we're wearing no masks, when we're in a mask, when we're remote, have all of those things already determined so we're not making emotional decisions throughout the school year based off of, we have the science and we have the numbers and we have good reporting techniques. So I think this year's a lot different. We could set up plans for that. And then lastly, just based on the current events of Afghanistan, and everybody I'm sure has been seeing that on TV, I'm just here to ask why we don't say the pledge at these meetings. And I'd like to see that done in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Krista Butz. I still live in Lee. I am here because when I was on the board, my absolute favorite portion of every meeting was listening to the principals talk about the wonderful things that our students were doing in our district. And since it's summer, they don't have anything to tell you about. So I came to tell you about some wonderful things that our kids are doing in our district. So on July 10th of this summer, a group of 18 students left from New Hampshire to go to Logan, West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains to do a mission trip. Of those 18 students, 13 of them are Oyster River High School students. They're either currently at Oyster River High School or coming into Oyster River High School in September. They did an amazing job. They survived a 19-hour drive down in the 15 passenger vans. And they painted 2 houses. They built 2 decks from scratch. They designed them themselves and went and got the wood and then built them themselves. They stained those 2 decks. They did landscaping. They planted vegetable gardens. They worked in a food pantry, and they worked in a clothing shelter. So they did an awesome job, and I just wanted to give them a big shout out and let them know that they're doing a great job. And in addition to that, there was another group of kids. There was 7 children. 6 of them were from Durham and Lee, and 1 was from Newmarket. And they went to the Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. This trip had been delayed. I think this was the 3rd or 4th year they tried to go, because it was delayed from the forest fires and then delayed from COVID, and so finally they got to go this year. It was a 12-day backpacking trek in the backcountry. They did 11 days and 10 nights on the trail. They participated in a conservation project. They earned their 50-miler award. They went whitewater rafting, and they earned their Duty to God award and more. So big shout out to them as well. And thank you all for the good job you're doing trying to keep our kids safe while they attend school this year. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. All right. Others? Okay, thank you. Approval of minutes from August 4th. Denise?
Make a motion to approve regular meeting minutes from August 4th.
We have a motion from Denise.
Second.
Second from Yussi. Any additions or discussion? Denise?
Yes, on page 3, the motion to approve the Chinese after-school program. The motion also included to charge the families $100.
Tom?
I thought it was $100 and $150 was the recommendation, was $100 and $150 for 2 or more siblings.
Yes.
And I think, since I made the motion, I think that there's approve it up to $17,000, which was the amount that was recommended. That was my memory of that. So, there's also Anita Mather's name is misspelled. It's M-A-T-H-U-R. It's the same page, page 3.
Page 3?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We had a couple of public commenters email to correct their positions the way they were reflected in the minutes, and Wendy reviewed the video to make sure those were correct, so those will be updated. All right, with those additions, all those in favor? 7 in favor, the minutes are approved. Announcements, commendations, and comments from the district. This is the part where those principal highlighting the great things that are going on that Krista was talking about. This would be the right time for that.
I'm still learning. I didn't know if I had to raise my hand. Good evening. So I have a couple different things I wanted to share with you tonight. So first, we received a letter from the NHIAA, and we are receiving an accommodation from the NHIAA National Federation of State High School Associations Award for Excellence. And this is for sportsmanship, outstanding sportsmanship of our athletes last year. And we'll actually receive the physical award in September, where Mr. Lathrop and I will attend to receive that from the NHIAA. So I was very proud of our athletes to know that, and I think this is the second year in a row that they've received this accommodation. And so it really says a lot about our students. So that's number one. Also, we have 3 different counseling boot camps going on, and so today, counseling actually had a boot camp for our seniors, an application boot camp, as we had seniors come in and get help from our counselors for that. Tomorrow, we have 84 freshmen that are already signed up for our freshman boot camp, and then next week, we have a new and returning student boot camp. And so the kiddos who were remote last year, who are coming back to school, and any new transfers in, can come to that boot camp and get to know the school and be with our counselors. Sports started on Monday, so it's been great getting to know a couple of the staff and people all summer, but it's absolutely wonderful having kids back in the building and around school, so it's been fun to see that and see them out there at tryouts and out on the field. Teachers are back in the building and working on curriculum. And then Friday, I get to have my first meeting with the student leaders in the building, and we're going to start talking about what students need when they come back to school and Spirit Week. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of those positive updates for all the action going on in the high school. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? All right, and from the board? All right, we'll move on to district reports then. Is Suzanne here?
Suzanne is not.
Suzanne's not here, so that would bring us to you, Jim.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to bring the board up to speed. In terms of enrollment, the high school is up pretty significantly from where we thought they would be. The elementaries and the middle school are actually either at or a little bit down from the spring. I only share that with you just to touch base on this issue. The actual enrollment, we will know on October 1st. And I'll continue to inform you as we open school. And that will help us understand more totally where we are as we transition from a largely remote situation last year to in-person. I would say that I have received so far only 1 official homeschool. There'll be more. And interestingly enough, I got a call from an area superintendent who was looking for a school, who had a parent who was looking for a school that was requiring masks at the beginning of the year. And I said, unfortunately, we really can't be taking any additional students. It was a high school student. And, but I thought that was a unique kind of thing because it hasn't happened to us before. So just touching base on enrollment. Touching base on the SAS program with New Hampshire. Catherine and Kim Wolf have been working on the application process for that. That's going to be a wonderful opportunity for us. It's not in the plan that we put together. It will be part of our plan as we go forward in the school year. I'm really excited by this because our unvaccinated students will be able to be tested on a regular rotating basis. It is an opt-in program, so parents will have to say, yes, I want to participate in this. And whether it's weekly or every other week, we'll be bringing the testing program to the elementary schools and to the middle school and to the high school. The other wonderful thing about this program is that if the nurses feel that a staff member has been exposed or worry about a staff member having been exposed, or the staff member just comes and says, I think I might have been exposed, the nurses have the ability on that day to do a test and send it over. And if they haven't run the batch for that day, we'll know with the batch that they run that day, we could know in hours instead of days. And there were situations last year where, a staff member had been put on quarantine for 14 days and never knew whether they had COVID during that whole time because the test would never return. And so the SAS program sponsored through UNH is really going to be a game changer for us as part of our overall mitigation plan. I wanted to bring you up to date on the Chinese teacher openings. So, as you know, we had a sudden resignation, which equally put me right into a sudden advertisement. Rebecca Noe and I have interviewed a candidate who would be wonderful. She's not naturalized, and that means we have to work through the visa situation. I have talked to our attorney who's a specialist in this area, and so Rebecca and I will be meeting with her again tomorrow to get a copy of the visa that she has, and that will help our attorney carve a path toward our ability or our inability to hire her. And then the other piece is whether she can get certified in New Hampshire. She already is certified in New Hampshire. Rebecca and I figured that out today, so that's good news. And so it's really boiling down to a visa situation. And because you guys know who I am, I also have Plan B, and we met with One World Language today. So if the visa obstacle becomes too much, we are working with Bridget Hers from One World Language to provide an alternative that would be a combination of on-site and remote. She would use two different people. The upper classes would be on-site. The introductory classes would have to be remote in order for that solution to work. So we're putting all our hopes and dreams into this one person, hoping we can, make sure that the visa piece it can work for her and for us. Any questions on that one? You got tons of time.
What's that?
I said you're lucky, you got tons of time.
Yeah. And then in terms of buses, Sue and Lisa and I have really worked a lot of hours this summer to try to figure out how to make the bus system work. As you all know, we have 31 drivers on paper, but only 21 in reality. I just really want to point out that this is not an Oyster River problem. This is it's a local and regional problem. It's a statewide problem, and it's also a national problem. So this is something that's haunting school districts and private providers across the country. So I was super concerned about 3 weeks ago that we were going to disrupt the schedules of the high school and the elementary schools pretty dramatically. As it turns out, it wasn't so dramatic, and part of it, of course, is, Lisa's skill at figuring out how to make things work. She's only got 3/4 of her drivers, or two-thirds of her drivers, and so what we're going to do is we're going to run the system the way we did in the spring, and this works to the elementary school's advantage in the sense that we will have dedicated buses serving both elementary schools, meaning they're not picking up middle school and high school kids. So we'll have dedicated buses for Massway and dedicated buses for Moheramet, and then we'll run dedicated buses for the middle school, high school. So when Sue and Lisa and I were working this initially,
We actually, our first draft had the elementaries ending at 3:55, which means that kids wouldn't have gotten home before 4:30, 4:35, 4:40. And we continue to work at it. David walked through my office one day, and he just simply said, "Jim, have you thought about this?" I hadn't thought about it, and when we put that into the mix, which is basically splitting the difference between the middle school, high school, and the elementary runs, it actually reduced the difference for the start time at the middle school and high school to only 15 minutes. So it's not perfect, but it's as close as we think we can get it. And the key to the whole thing is allowing 45 minutes between the high school, middle school runs and the elementary. And so we've achieved that. And having all of this on paper, I just want to remind everybody that Lisa has no idea who's going to be jumping on the bus in the first couple weeks of school. She's prepared as if everybody's going to jump on the bus, and that's the only way that she can do it, because when we ask parents for information, when it's this specific, it's not very helpful because we get yeses, nos, and maybes, and unknowns where people don't respond. So the only real way to test a bus system in the first week or two in the school system is to run it. So that's what we'll do, and Lisa will work out, as she always does, the hiccups between the first day of school and, beginning of the third week of school, because it usually takes about 2 weeks for us to work through it. So having said that, I'm asking the parents, as I always do, please be patient with the transportation system. If a bus is coming later or it's coming early, well, it will be later, it won't be earlier. It's just because the bus drivers are trying to pick up at every stop, and if there's nobody there in these first couple of weeks, they still stop because the student could be coming down the driveway and they hadn't told the bus company, so bus division. So I think this is a really as good a plan as we could possibly put together when we are missing 10 drivers. So then the question comes up is, Lisa has a couple of drivers in the hopper being trained. If they come in, does this master schedule change? And so what I would say to the board is, no. Once we start this master schedule, we can't start jury-rigging it, because the high school and the middle school in particular build their master schedule around these start times. So if Lisa brings in more drivers, what does that allow us to do? It allows us to start picking up transportation for athletics. It allows us to start doing normal field trips. So, as we go through the school year, we won't adjust the beginning and end, but as we get drivers, we'll be able to offer more of what we traditionally offer. But having said that, it takes a long time to train a driver, so it's not likely to change dramatically. It'll change slowly over the school year because we continue to actively advertise. I want to thank Michael for some suggestions and Yussi for some suggestions. We followed through on those. We have sent it throughout. We've sent the openings through social media now. We've sent the openings across the district as well as traditional advertising. And hopefully, that will result in 1, 2, or more drivers coming on board. And if somebody out there isn't interested in a full-time job, even part-time drivers would help us immensely when it comes to field trips or athletics. So if somebody says, I really only want to do an afternoon run for sports, we'll take it. So if you're interested and you have your current license and you just want to put a couple hours in, thank you, we'd love to have you. If you're interested in full-time employment, we do offer the training, and our salary and benefits are pretty good. Our benefits are amazing, and our salary is still competitive. So I've spent a lot of time on this because this is the big hole in employment right now. Questions I can answer there?
Are these times final for the start of the school year then?
Yes, I'll put this out tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just waiting. The principals were on me on this again today, rightfully so. I said, board sees it first before we put it out in the community, so that's what tomorrow morning this will go out.
Would it be helpful if families who are certain they will not utilize the bus to tell Lisa
Yeah,
soon?
I mean, whatever information families have, that would be great. We can, it's not like when we survey them on other things. I mean, the community is really great, like when we did the survey on the beginning of the school year. When it comes to transportation, we've done that so many times, and the information is not very good. We put it in the registration material. Registration will open up Monday, fingers crossed, and there is a transportation question there. But again, for whatever reason, it's not a strong database that will guide Lisa's decisions. The best thing that she can do is run her buses and see who actually gets on the bus.
I also had a question about athletics and transportation. It makes perfect sense that we're prioritizing the school day and don't have driver capacity for athletics currently. On the non-school days, on weekends, or even in this next week, is there the opportunity to provide bus service then?
Yes, so Lisa and Andy have been working together. Andy has known about this issue now from its inception. He's worked very, very hard at seeing if he can adjust games. He's had nominal success. He's moved some to Saturdays, and on a Saturday we can provide transportation if Lisa has a driver. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. And if Andy was successful in moving past the end time of the elementary, the answer is yes. But it's been hard work to make things change. So people are less willing to change games than you'd think they would be, because we're all facing the same transportation issue.
I had a question as well on the UNH testing program, which seems like an incredible resource across our community, especially if a lot of people participate. And I'm wondering when information will be made public to families, both about the program overall and about the process for their families.
As soon as the application is done and approved, so we can't put anything out until all of that's done, and it does involve, DHHS approval and so forth. So Kim and Catherine have been actively engaged with Jeff at UNH, and there's a particular piece of paperwork that Kim and Catherine are working on for tomorrow. Yeah. So it's going as fast as it can possibly go.
Yeah, it's such a resource to have the testing done at the family level, just to provide that sense of security for asymptomatic examples, but especially for the community at large. Having a high testing percentage just keeps the community safer.
Yeah, it's one of the conversations that Rebecca and I had last week. She was getting, queries about what she reported about tonight, the freshman group, the senior group, et cetera, et cetera. And I just simply said it's a community that's ravenous for information, and you can only put out the information when you have it, but people want it before it's ready. The same will be the SAS. It doesn't serve any purpose to put it out before we have the parameters to share with the family, so we'll get it out as fast as we get approval. Is there any other questions on those two? Thank you. So the other question that came up was training for parents in Schoology. So I sent that out to the tech integrators, and of course, they're not under contract yet, but they were working on it already as a team, and so that'll happen in September. So we'll be opening up training opportunities for our parents. And I think that pretty much does it, Michael. Did I get everything on my list? Yep. All right, so we're ready to move to a strategic plan?
You want to do that first? Do you want to do the architect?
Architects report.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ryan Terrell, you want to come up? Come on down. Ryan is the interior designer for the new middle school, and he has been working exhaustively, quite frankly, with our teaching staff in terms of making sure their needs are met in the new middle school. one of the most wonderful opportunities about a new school is everything is new, from, soup to nuts, cafeteria, furniture, the classroom furniture, administration, and so forth. And Ryan's job in the project is to continuously sit with people, get an understanding of how they use their classroom, and then come up with solutions that would work for the entire school. He's worked really tens of hours meeting with our own staff, and the number of hours he works putting it all together as a package is probably insurmountable, because he just is an amazing contact for us. And so I would introduce Ryan, and he will talk to us about the furniture solution for the new middle school.
How do I?
Did I talk long enough so you could get that going, Ryan?
Almost. I'm here, I'm just not there.
And Ryan attended the old middle school, the current middle school.
That's right.
So he's designing the new school for the one that he attended, so.
Yes, which
That's
has
cool.
been a real trip. It's been awesome. And before I start, it has been a real pleasure to design this school, and doing the full package furniture project has been amazing, because it really is the finishing touch on a comprehensive design that we've been working on since 2018. So we just got through designing about 8 or 9 months of furniture designs for this project. I'm going to give you a little taste of what we did systematically and conceptually, and a small preview of some of the pieces that we're going to be using that you'll see over and over throughout the school. So our biggest kind of directive here was flexibility. Very, very few things in this school are built in. We wanted to really emphasize the flexibility that the teachers and staff have, and the students have within their own environment. And in doing so, we really wanted to focus on type of furniture, the mobility of furniture, and the palette of furniture to keep this building as future-proof as we can get it. As you can see in the graphic on this slide, this actually gives a quick example of how you can rearrange furniture within minutes within a classroom to support the curriculum, support the learning styles, and support different types of children and different types of educators, while all using the same pieces. So these aren't exactly the pieces we are using, but this is a good example of what we've been planning for. So first is the type. Repeatable forms, shapes, and model numbers to provide the building with an agile visual recognition and ability to ebb and flow with student population. When a 5th grader comes in here and is given a tour, and they see a classroom, and their first day of school, they see a whole completely different wing, they will see the same furniture throughout all the classrooms, so they recognize that is a classroom, alleviating any kind of anxiety for a new student. These also provide a certain level of nimbleness for the teachers to be able to move from group work to individual work to testing within a few minutes. So this is some of the standard furniture you'll see in the classroom. Mobility is huge here. We wanted stackable lightweight furniture that will provide everyone the ability to reorganize the classrooms, and that will support the curriculum and any kind of future need to socially distance. With the exception of the learning commons / dining commons and the STEM and art rooms, which require a larger surface area for projects, every single student surface here is per student, 1 per student. So you are able to socially distance in 99% of the rooms here. In our palette, as you can see here, a small glimpse of some of the pieces we're using throughout each of the classrooms. We're able to future-proof the building not only in its flexibility, but in the fact that in 25 years, you might get a total curriculum change. This is an example of actually 2 of the world language classrooms. in the lower left, and in 20 years, those classrooms might need to become one large classroom, or they might need to become 3 smaller classrooms. But in any event, you're stuck with the same amount of students, the same amount of furniture, and it all works together. Here's a small case study of 2 adjacent spaces within the first floor of the new building. This is the dining and learning commons you'll see on the left, and the library and makerspace on the right. The dining and learning commons are a full day space. This area is an extension of the library. So you'll have I believe it's 2 lunch periods, and then the furniture is there for the rest of the day to be utilized for classrooms, study groups, group projects, anything and everything that might be supported in this space. This is the actual distance between the 2 spaces. That white space down the center is just a corridor. And that entrance to the library is a full glazing storefront system of glass. Everything in yellow is flexible library shelving. So they are able to change the collection and move with different semester or yearly needs, with exception to the tall shelving up along the north side of that wall, which is mounted to the wall for taller stability. Everything is movable. So they can rearrange this library however they see fit. And then any kind of space outside of the library in the learning commons is utilized for work surfaces. So every single piece of furniture you see here is within these 2 spaces, and every single thing here is movable, stackable, foldable, on casters of some type, or easily moved with 1 to 2 adults. Here's a sneak peek of the administrative suites. So all of the admin and counseling suites will be getting these types of furniture in a relatively neutral palette with a lot of metal legs and laminate tops. This is a typical classroom. So we do have one piece of furniture that is a team or wing identifier. These are the 4 kind of prevailing colors that we use throughout the space. So they will have a couple stools in each classroom that go with each team. But the rest of the furniture can be rearranged depending on the year, depending on class sizes, and depending on curriculum studies. Similarly with the science labs. And again, here's the dining commons that is all flexible furniture, all foldable, stackable. Well, the seating is stackable. And the library makerspace, where everything, again, with the exception of those very tall library shelves, are flexible. It's a short update, but does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah.
I know you showed us before, but for the teachers, it's both a sitting and standing desk.
Yes,
right?
So every single adult, an administrator, a counselor, the nurse, the athletic teachers, the primary curriculum teachers, art teachers, they all have a sit-to-stand desk.
And it's not a power desk, it's they just,
It's
so they
pneumatic.
can still move it.
Yeah.
Wherever they
So they
want
can
to.
move it around.
Okay.
Yep.
Looks great.
Fantastic, yeah.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, and so now we'll move into our strategic plan update. I do want to just point out for the board in terms of that one of the suggestions that Michael made and is embedded in our report now is that at the top of every goal, we tell you the status. So it's either completed or in process or in progress. And I thought that was a great addition. And if any narrative is where the detail is. So I'm going to invite Kim and Catherine and Felicia. Catherine, are you going up? And John, yeah, John Wood. So this is John's maiden voyage in front of the board. I told him that you guys were friendly, and he was relaxed by that. But John Wood is our new director at the high school. Felicia is our coordinator at the elementary schools, and Kim is coordinating the middle school. So they are now acting as a team around mental health and wellness and social emotional learning. And we think this new arrangement will allow us to do a much more comprehensive and coordinated effort in these areas. So, Catherine?
Yeah, so Kim is going to talk a little bit about that new shift that we've created for each of our schools. I'm actually going to let them take the lead so you can hear directly from our practitioners who are working in mental health and social emotional learning. Kim is going to talk about the district in terms of our district mental health and social emotional learning goal. And then Felicia is going to cover the elementary schools because she's going to be coordinating social emotional learning and mental health for elementary school. And then John, of course, will cover the high school. So I'm going to let them take the lead on that. And then after we're done the SEL portion, David and Misty will come up and cover the rest of the MTSS academic pieces. So competency-based education and then the MTSS academic.
Good evening. How are you all? Good to see you. I just wanted to, before I start, just want to recognize that as we ended a year of uncertainty and stress and anxiety, and we all hoped that we would start a year with normalcy and less stress and anxiety, we are still in that phase. We're still in the actual trauma. We haven't gone to the aftermath part of it. So I think that's important to start with because as we look at our SEL and our mental health in our district, we're still in the crisis and planning for the post-crisis. So we've had plenty of time during the crisis to prepare for the post-crisis because it's been ongoing. And I think we are getting a jump on preparing and getting ready for as things start to feel more normal, which they kind of have a little bit of a feel this year, thankfully. So we're excited to start sharing with you guys some of the updates to the strategic plan. I'm just going to give some bulleted things for you, and then if you have questions, please feel free to let me know. The first thing I'd start with is our reconfiguration of overall district coordination of SEL and mental health. I had transitioned from the K through 12 director role to the coordinator at the middle school, 5 through 8. And then the responsibility was shifted for elementary to Felicia, and then high school is just John's responsibility. Finding that being in charge of district-wide and not really being in the buildings is quite a challenge. And you don't, if your feet aren't in the water, you don't know how it feels. So that was part of the conversation and the change and the shift. Already I see a huge difference, and I'm excited to go back to middle school. I had 17 years prior of middle school experience, so it's kind of like feeling like I'm going home there. So as we look at the strategic plan, the biggest thing is looking at our supports and our programming in place. And the addition of that fourth counselor has already helped us have more supports at the middle school, but it's also helped us district-wide. So we have more opportunities to collaborate and have more focused building level. And then we want to continue our work around coordinating our pre-K through SEL. And part of doing that will be John, Felicia, and I will be meeting weekly to ensure that we are looking at the continuity of care from pre-K through 12, and also looking at consistency, collaboration, so we're not using our resources and then not knowing what we're using our resources wisely and then not using our resources. That's a double negative. Let me rephrase that. Not using our resources because we don't know they exist. And that sometimes happens with the K through 12. So we can sit down and kind of collaborate and see where we're at with our MTSSB teams, what are the struggles, what are the needs, and have a continual assessment of how that's going. The other piece is that we want to continue to audit the SEL curriculum that's in place and how to make changes and move forward with that. And then our continued alignment with the CASEL standards, district-wide as well. So that's something we'll work on. The other piece that our trio will be working on is staff PD around trauma-informed care and also looking at Suicide Prevention Connect training, mental health and wellness in general, so that our teachers are in a good spot to be able to educate and be supportive to our students. What we will continue to work on is refining the MTSSB teams at each level. We're definitely ready to really fine-tune that, and then continue training and reevaluation of what we need and what we need to do to make more progress. And part of that is identifying the criteria in the supports that we have at each building level, and then how do we identify which students need that and where we access that help. And then also I will continue to collaborate and continue to have a K through 12 mental health provider meeting, which is an opportunity for our school psychs and counselors to meet monthly, to do training, to kind of have a roundtable, and also take care of their own self-care as well. It's a very healthy way to have that moment of, oh, you're feeling stressed, so am I, which helps them to be available for care. And then the big thing is the district level SEL that kind of took a little pause, our meeting, and we're going to reinstate that and get that going as well. So I'm going to pass it to the elementary school to give an update on the SEL, but first, does anyone have any questions around district level strategic plan SEL? No? Awesome. Alicia? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Felicia Sperry. I'm the school psych at Mastway and now coordinator of SEL for pre-K through fourth grade. So basically, I'm just going to review where we are at with the strategic plan for the elementary schools around SEL. And I can mention the CASEL standards, and I think that's really an important piece to have in your minds too when you're thinking about elementary school, because it's about teaching skills, and it's really important that when we teach kids skills on how to manage themselves, their behaviors, their feelings, then we have kids who are ready to learn, and then also they know what to do when something comes up and don't develop concerns around mental health later on. So it's really about skill building and teaching. So it's perfect that it happens within our classrooms and our schools. So we worked pretty hard over the years to pick and choose a SEL curriculum. So we have instituted the Open Circle program, which came out of Wellesley, and that has been, we've been doing that for a couple of years now. All the teachers are trained, staff is trained. The idea is that it takes place in the classroom, but it's integrated throughout and embedded throughout curriculum and in the school. And that puts a really great foundation for our elementary school kids to have this consistent curriculum, and then we build from there. And that's where we're headed now, is to really build from there. In the strategic plan, it talks about the DESA, which was an instrument that we had looked at when we did the original SEL committee had chosen that. We kind of didn't know, well, we did know, but we really needed to have that system in place, because you can collect data, but if you don't have a system to discuss it, so we could have put a pause on the idea of picking that a screener, and now we focused on the MTSSB development, which is what we're doing. So each building would have an MTSSB committee, and that's which school psych, school counselor, whoever we've selected to be on it, and then from there they would be able to look at the data. So that's part of our plan, is to look at screeners, what data we're going to use, criteria we're going to have the tier 2, tier 3 interventions, and then how we determine which kids need those supports, and then when they do, we progress monitor when they do well, and they can exit getting the supports. So that's where we really are at for this year, that we'll be working on that piece. So the DESA may be one of the screeners, but we want to take a look at others, and also based on talking about our needs and what we feel we need, and what data we can collect in-house from things that we already have.
Sorry, just to clarify on that. So it wasn't that we started using the DESA screener and we were not happy with what we were seeing there or the way that it worked for the staff. It was that we realized we needed to have.
Combination of both.
Okay.
We used it once, and then there was a lot of technical difficulties with it. So, and then it became, then we kind of decided we needed to take a look at possible other things as well, too.
Okay.
Yep. And then within that, as we learned more about MTSSB, then we realized, you know what, we really should have a system in place because we can screen all the kids and we get that data. What do we do then if we don't have the system in place? So we realized we shifted a little bit. So DESA still could be, they've also refined the DESA since we reached, because we were actually using, when we tried it, it was brand new. So they've refined it since then. So it's not necessarily off the table, but it's definitely one of the options that we'll take a look at. And then the idea is expanding our open circle training to include parents. So there's, the goal is to have common language throughout the schools so that everybody's using the language that's part of open circle. Also there's some parent training that we want to do, and then eventually community as well. Having this coordinating position is super helpful because then we can coordinate between the two buildings. The plan is to have a committee, an SEL committee, comprised of both Moherman and Massway staff and interventionists so that we can coordinate what's going on and meeting the needs of the individual buildings and respecting the culture of the different buildings and how we're gonna do that. Let me just see. Embedding the curriculum is really important. So really getting those tier 2, tier 3 pieces in place is going to be the focus for this year, and continuing making sure the staff PD around suicide and prevention, trauma sensitive, around open circle, how they can embed it, use literacy opportunities, and then kind of go from there. Any questions? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's great about the three of us working together weekly is that I can get a good sense of what our students have learned at the elementary school for SEL and what areas they might need a little bit more support on. I think that's going to make a huge difference with that continuity. In the middle school, the addition of the fourth counselor really is a huge integral part of us reforming and re-imaging the middle school counseling department. I'm really excited about the re-imaging of that department. We are starting to implement our on-call system, which we have had at the high school and has been quite successful. That system allows for our counselors to get in the classroom, and that's what we're missing. So instead of responding to crisis daily, they can go to the one person who's on call who can handle that crisis, and then the counselor stays in the classroom and can continue to do the SEL curriculum in collaboration with the teachers and the teams. And part of that too is looking at how we can pilot some of the SEL programs. There's a couple that I've researched over the summer. I also applied for a piloting grant through the DOE. It's One Trusted Adult, which is the ripple effect. And we've been accepted with 5 other schools to pilot this SEL curriculum. So I'm really excited to roll that out. That includes free PD for staff. It includes an assembly for students, and it also collects data for us as well. So that's all aligned to our MTSS Tier 1. And then in the meantime, while that's going on, we'll do a little bit of spot piloting some of the other SEL evidence-based programs. And then being in the classroom for all grade levels. We highlighted 5th grade last year. Our counselors were in there twice a week. We've expanded and scheduled to be in all 4 grades, 5 through 8, with the counselors. And then a lot of what we need to do is some PD with our staff around SEL, using common language, around the CASEL standards. And so our counselors developed essential questions using the CASEL standards for each grade, and that's kind of the goal, the SEL goal, that we'll use for educating them throughout the year. And the hope is that, because SEL truly is classroom-based, so the hope is that we will have the teachers as well use that essential question in all their lessons. And that will become the norm, that we're embedding the SEL in our everyday classroom practice. And then the next big step will be really establishing the Tier 2, Tier 3 system and looking at our screener as well. We really are going to have a solid Tier 1 We're going to have a system in place for Tier 2 and 3, and this year we'll also be investigating and looking as well as at the DESA and some other forms of data collection in hopes that we can identify students who may need referral to Tier 2, Tier 3. And ongoing training, professional development for our counselors. We have 2 brand new counselors to our district, so we have to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. There's a little bit of a learning curve settling in for the year. Any questions? Okay, the finale, Mr. John Webb.
Thank you. I was going to say that the last time I was on stage, I was performing for Dick Tappan for his musical play Cake back in 1986, but the stage wasn't here. It was over there. You guys, throughout the years, you've transformed this building. It's amazing. So I'm so glad to be back, and I want to thank the board and Dr. Morse and Ms. Philippon for your support and prioritization of social emotional learning. So crucial for our kids today. I want to thank Kim and Felicia as well. I'm so lucky to be a part of this trio. Such amazing knowledge and background. So they're getting me up to speed. So I'm just happy to be here. For the high school, I want to talk a little bit more about the depth of SEL at the high school level. So we do have MTSS for Tier 1 and Tier 2 and 3. Tier 1 is spearheaded with Mike McCann and Mark Milliken. Tier 2 and 3 with Melissa Jean. I've joined her and Hannah Cunningham to really focus on those interventions around social emotional issues related to kids learning or not learning. So we had a day-long training workshop yesterday. I'm getting up to speed, and I'm excited about the data-informed decisions that we'll be making using MTSS, and looking forward to how that can be reported out to you in the future. As for the SEL interventions that my counseling team does, I'm so, again, blessed to have Heather McAnoff, who was in this role, or K-12 role, and is just a wealth of experience and knowledge for me, as well as the other counselors who have 5+ years experience at our high school level and have been incredible with using their summertime to plan for social emotional learning, for planning these boot camps, for helping transition our kids back to the high school in the best way that they can. I feel that they are recharged and refreshed and ready to best assist kids get back to somewhat feeling normal. So I'm excited about that as well. I wanted to speak a little bit more about the pieces in place programmatically, certainly having advisory and using social emotional learning within advisory. We do have an advisory committee made up of 72 members of our staff, which helps with brainstorming and understanding what is going to be delivered in advisory. We also have an ongoing connection with community partners to help with other mental health issues. I do ask, maybe the people watching, we have not yet hired our part-time LADAC, substance abuse counselor, for 12 hours. We're really desperately looking for someone to come and help out with that. Dr. Morse and I, we have registered for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which will happen in November, so that we can gather some data about what's going on with our students. So we're looking for those evidence points to report back to you to say, here's where we're at, here's what we need. So stay tuned on that as well. We do have a series of trainings around trauma for the faculty. We have a series of trainings around suicide prevention for students and faculty. We've got a bystander training. I'm working with Shauna Horsley to have that come back in the springtime. And that we are integrating the advisory and flex time to also deliver the high school counseling social emotional learning curriculum. So I'm incredibly excited about that. Look forward to reporting back with more information in our near future. Are there any questions?
I'd like to ask a question of the three of you. So the question I get asked a lot as a superintendent is, we know how to measure math, we know how to measure English, and we do that, we see our test scores, and it'll tell us, where we need to intervene with students. Can you give us a sense of how you progress monitor SEL and mental health?
Sure. In fact, thanks for bringing that up, because that's a need that you probably saw on the strategic plan, is that we don't have an effective SEL way of gathering data yet. And that's part of my task and my new role, is to come up with something that's going to work effectively and is evidence-based. So that would be something else that I'd be reporting back to all of you about what we find that's going to work. Certainly we want to measure levels of trauma, depression, anxiety. I'm a health-based counselor, so I also want to know what things are going well for students and families, so that we can use some of the effective tools to help others who might not be as well versed with those coping skills. That's just a general answer, but good question. Anyone else?
I'm in.
Okay.
So basically, I piggyback on what John said, it's not a one point that we can do. So it's looking at multiple points, like looking at attendance, looking at their grades, looking at how they're functioning, their relationships, do they have friends? And so that's why it takes, when we talk about data collection, just a screener isn't going to give us all that information. So we have to pull, that's why MTSSB meetings are so important, because it gives an opportunity to collect information from different sources. You can have a child who has anxiety, and there could be a ton of reasons why they have that anxiety. And like I said earlier, is like at the elementary level, we're looking at skill deficits. That little guy has anxiety, or the behavior may not be what it should be because they don't have the skills to manage what they're experiencing. That's very true of the older kids. Well, they don't have the skills. And so our job is to kind of assess where their skills are at. So we could pick a screener tomorrow and say, yeah, sure, these 200 kids have anxiety. Then what do we do? Well, they all have anxiety for different reasons. So that's why it's getting that idea of talking about what skill deficits they may have, but also what goes well for them. What do they do? What are their strengths, that we can use those strengths to help them compensate for the areas that may not be going as well. So unfortunately, we're not going to have that, do the STAR assessment, know where they are SEL, but the idea is that it takes a lot of coordination, so it's really important for those MTSSB meetings to take place where we can collect all that data. And the other part is progress monitoring kids, and that's a great question. How do we know? Well, we'll see an improvement in their behavior. We'll see an improvement, but we have to be monitoring it. We just can't, they're going to work with the school counselor for the rest of the year and see how it goes. So it's really important, because if it's not working, we need to change it and do something different. So again, why MTSS is really important.
Denise.
Not a question, just thank you, particularly with last year and how challenging it was, and to continue to support our kids, and just a real thank you. And it's exciting to see the direction that you're moving as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add, as David and Misty are coming up, and I remember the conversation, and I'm sure Tom does as well, 8 years ago when we started down this path, and we all were kind of like, what does this mean? And I remember, and this will be a Kenny story, Al, I remember Kenny advocating that we needed to be paying attention to this area before we really knew we needed to be paying attention to this area. And so, 8 years later, we have, amazing professionals coordinating this work, and I'm so pleased that we have these three coordinating it with our faculty and counselors and psychologists, because I think it's going to make all the difference in the program. I think this is the next step in our evolution in this area.
Good evening. Thank you. David and Misty from Moherman and Massway to talk about the academic side of MTSS. We actually started this work before the strategic plan began, and so when the strategic plan went into effect, we were in some different places as two schools around that, and we've come together very well, I think. You can see from the grid that we're really on track. We've completed our goals for the first 2 years, and we're planning already. We've already been meeting with our groups to continue on along our path. The shutdown, the remote shutdown 2 springs ago, and then our very varied schedules last year have definitely impacted our ability to practice the work and implement the work as fully as we wanted. We couldn't do it 2 springs ago, and last year we did as much of it as we could based on either the half-day models or the remote classrooms, and then coming together in the spring. So this year, while continuing on our path, we're really also focusing on re-implementing everything that we had established prior to the shutdown, and just continuing those iterations so that it becomes more efficient, more effective, I mean, we all know all of our roles. The MTSS academic piece, really, as Dr. Morrison, as counseling has discussed, it's about systems. So we've always had amazing teachers doing great work in classrooms. We've always had amazing providers going in and supporting students who are identified. But this is about creating a whole system so that all of those individual pods are working together so that we can be identifying students as a group, supporting the needs of those students more effectively as a group because we can share resources, move students where they need to go, and really target their learning. The data that we've seen so far from students who have really gone through multiple years of that kind of support has been eye-opening and really tremendous. Some of our most impacted learners have made huge gains, and students who were just below where we wanted them went into the MTSS system, came out of the MTSS system with their gains, and we're back on track. So it's been working really well. We have implemented, we're in different places with reading and math. They're not the same, and so it won't look the same even when we're done. Interventions for reading are different than interventions for math. The needs of reading support are different than the needs of math. Reading can sometimes be more pull out, math can be more push in. So the models will look different, and so we've been working on both those issues in our schools, and it's impacted our school schedules, so we've been working on that. It's been pretty cool.
I just want to add that Massway and Mohammed began this journey in different places. I think we are much more in line today than where we were when I became interim 2 years ago. In spite of the pandemic, we have made a lot of positive growth with our MTSS system. We are all very excited to completely reboot and remember the why behind MTSS. And that's what we're prepared to really push out this fall, is to reboot MTSS, get our systems back in place, make sure that we're looking at our data very carefully, doing interventions, tracking them over time, changing them if they're not effective in order that we're not extending any gaps that our kids have. The goal of MTSS is to close those gaps for those children. So we continue to have work to do, although looking at this grid, it looks like we are on track. I don't want to not acknowledge the work. We still have hard work ahead to continue this journey.
And just from a budget perspective, that's been a piece of the report out as well. We've been working with a consultant district-wide. That consultant has been incredibly helpful, bringing experience and research from all across the state and the country to our work, and that consultant continues to work with us. So that's a cost. Otherwise, it's all in-house. And as Misty said, we're just continuing on. I think the outcomes for our students and our teachers have been pretty awesome.
We're very blessed, I'm sorry. Okay. And I just want to highlight the talent we have in district, in addition to our consultant. We're just very fortunate to have so many knowledgeable staff members that support this work with our MTSS system, in addition to our consultant. That was all I was going to add.
Questions?
We've had a lot of new teachers in the elementary level, other levels too, but especially in the elementary level the last couple of years. We have a bunch of new teachers this year.
Yeah.
Are there special things you have to do to familiarize the new teachers with, that haven't been on the journey with the rest of the staff over the last few years, with the tools, with the approach that we're taking?
A great question, Michael. We do. We have to orient them to what we're doing. I will say a lot of our new teachers come from schools that have implemented systems that are similar in enough that we just explain how we do it. And they say, oh, and it makes sense. And we're very fortunate because they then bring their experiences and they can say, oh, here's how we did it. And when they come to our meetings and do our team grade level work, we learn from them as well. But you mentioned the history, and that's always a big piece of our orientation because we all make decisions and we all act based on where we've come from. And so it's important for our new teachers to understand the journey Mohammed and Massway have been on and the whole district, and to understand why we are where we are, and then they can share where they went with their schools. So that's all part of the orientation.
I think another example, Michael, to acknowledge your question is to talk about the different types of assessments that we utilize to collect student performance data. So different people that have been in different districts may not have used STAR, they may have used NELA or something of that nature. So just training them on the types of data collection we use, how you read those reports, that kind of thing for our data team meetings is an example of training that we would provide.
And I would also add, Michael, in relation to your question, and when we're doing the interviews of new staff, we're using questions that complement the strategic plan. So we're asking questions about DEI, we're asking questions about SEL, we're asking questions that reflect our priorities as a district in the interview process. And one of the things that we emphasize with new staff is we aren't hiring you to sit back and watch. We're hiring you to join us in this journey. And so and Jay is particularly great at this, he really emphasizes the issue of participation. You know, you could sit across the table with somebody with 30 years experience and you may only have 5. We want those 5 years to be part of the conversation. We don't want you to sit back and just watch the senior staff do it. We want your hands in it and helping us grow. And that's really what David was alluding to when we really try to activate new voices in our work and not just let them observe. They come with experiences. Some people come with many, many years of experiences. Some come with few. But we bring them into the district because we see something in them that will help us grow as a system. And so the interview process on the front end for new staff is very deliberate by our administrators.
Yeah.
A question about the interface, I guess, between SEL and classroom content. And so it could be to building administrators or to the mental health and SEL team. I know that the teachers are increasingly trained on what's happening in the SEL world and bringing it into their classrooms, even outside of formal SEL programming. So sort of across the board within a classroom. Is there, when a particularly difficult subject matter or a challenging reading or lesson is coming up, is there coordination between the teacher team and the SEL on that particular unit? So any sort of controversial or emotionally challenging issues?
There is, UC. I mean, I can't describe enough that elementary school teachers and staff talk to each other just constantly. I'm sure it's the same at the middle school and the high school, but it's constant. So if it's an issue like you're discussing, a challenging topic, teachers reach out, we reach out, counseling support, school psych support, ways to think about the introduction, the delivery of those content areas, and also how to then, remember, we want this to be as Socratic as possible. So when students start interacting with that conversation and they start asking questions or sharing or bringing back how we all manage that, that's a big piece of so much of what this district focuses on all the time. But I want to answer it a little differently as well, because there's an SEL component to academic MTSS when we're dealing with students who are struggling in a subject area and they go off for the Tier 2 or the Tier 3 interventions. There's a huge SEL component to how our tutors, our special ed case managers, any of our providers, ESOL, how everyone works with a student. We have to understand where they come from, what their needs are, and so there's just constant interaction between counseling, the counseling realm and academics when we support our students in anything, especially at these ages.
I just want to add, I really appreciate that question, and I think it even extends outside the classroom. We're really trying to have that Tier 1 SEL open circle, that common language embedded everywhere in the school system, like whether we're in the cafeteria, whether we are at recess, or in a classroom setting. So that's more of the work we still have to do. We'd love to get to the point where we're joining with the community and teaching these strategies and language and things of that nature about Open Circle to our parents so that they could use the same language at home. So there's still more work to do there, but we really want it embedded throughout everything in the K-4 day, not even just the classroom.
Can I chime in? I love that question because it actually happens quite frequently, and what I love about the Open Circle program, it's the curriculum that gets that's taught through Open Circle, but it's the process that's really important. So Open Circle comes out of Wellesley, which is relationally based, so the whole idea of that open circle becomes a forum in how you can ask those difficult questions. So teachers use it all the time when there's a concern, that say on the playground, and they'll come in, let's have an open circle so we can discuss it. There's been really touchy subjects or certain incidences that have taken place in the school. The teachers have reached out to myself or the school counselor and said, hey, can you sit down in this open circle with me? I really want to talk about this difficult topic with these kiddos. Can we do it? So what's great about our choice in this program is that it's not just providing opportunities to teach skills, but actually to use them and to practice them. And then it gives teachers, and every single time I've sat in on one, I've said nothing. The teacher knew exactly what to do. It was just having that support there. So there's that constant conversation. If they know there's going to be a more difficult lesson, they'll come up and talk about it. But I love how it's being used. It's really great.
Okay, excellent.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you all
you,
so
guys.
much. Yep.
And so I'll bring Jim and Jay up to the podium to talk about the strategic plan as it relates to the new school. Both of these gentlemen have been part and parcel of the envisioning of this new school and have attended weekly meetings since the school was approved. Jay often helped me with night meetings and day meetings as we were trying to get the community support. So it's been, an incredible journey to see the school being put up, and both of these guys have been right at the heart of it. When you look at Jay's update, it stops, and Jay's and Jim's for that matter, it stops in February, because just so much that has to get done between now and February. So you'll see a additional plan coming out that will take us from March through the end of the, well, actually, March to August, because that will be the official opening. So, Jay, take it away.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Morris, because, I recall fondly there was a time when we were looking in fields and looking at different sites, and I remember when we talked about the potential of moving into a brand new facility in February of 2022, and it seemed so far away. It really did, and here we are. It's this year, and it's very exciting. I guess two key words in terms of what this process has looked like this past year and is going to continue to look like is collaboration and teamwork. You've heard me say before, it's pretty much every single day I think about the middle school schedule. Not a day goes by that we're not thinking about the move and the transition into the new facility. Jim is a huge, important teammate with this. We're talking about scenarios all the time, what we need to do, and our goal is real simple. You've also heard us say, when we move into the new building, we want the facility to be something that we look back on and are very proud of and say we did this right, and that's how we look at the move. We want this to be the perfect move for our school community, our staff, and most important, our students, and what that transition will look like. We've also been collaborating with outside school districts. And we had a huge meeting today with our ORMS task force, where the primary focus was just on the move, talking about a variety of different scenarios of what staff would need, things we would think about in terms of what our paraprofessionals would do and how they can help the process, and even students in helping with the process of the transition to the new RMS. We have things planned like the Department of Education has a specialist that talks about school safety and school building concerns and challenges, and actually she's going to be a guest speaker for us on the opening teacher workshop day, so we're looking forward to that. I don't think Jim has attended too many those type of task force meetings today, but he was great. Nate Fisk is a partner in this too, who's the head of all our facilities and custodians. We have everything kind of mapped out in terms of what each month will look like. And again, I've already said it in terms of collaboration and working with people. I do want to mention we have other groups. Tomorrow we would meet with a playground committee in terms of talking about potential playground plans and what that would look like. So I have a group of parents that are really interested in that, and some of them have backgrounds from UNH in terms of recreation as well as occupational therapy to make sure it meets the needs of all of our students. And I've also had a meeting with our PTO in terms of fundraising. I know in the recital hall there's going to be 901 seats. We have a sample in the front main office lobby area, what that seat's going to look like. If you haven't seen that, check it out. And on those seats is a little, I guess I would call it a template, where people can make a donation and have, for example, a family name engraved on that will go into the new recital hall. And the plan is, and again, I've collaborated with our PTO in terms of what that cost would be, and we've come up with a number of $250 for that. And again, that would go into the recital hall with that name on that. We need to create a sound process and system to take in those donations, but that could potentially raise over $200,000 for our playground equipment. One thing I've learned is playground equipment is very, very expensive, again. So that just kind of, we've also talked about bricks. It's a very popular item. One of the things we did when we tore down the gym, I had a lot of students express interest in the old gym bricks that I gave them. There's been a lot of high interest in the bricks, particularly from the portion of the building from the 1930s. Do we use those bricks as a fundraiser? So we're talking about those scenarios as well with a variety of different groups. So those are just a couple, kind of quick examples. Things are moving really, really quick on that.
Jay, one group you should mention is the Historic Society.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morris. So we have been working with the Durham Historical Society. They've come in several times to meet with me and Todd Selig and Ryan as well in terms of items that they would like to bring to the Historical Society. Another really big piece is visits of the old ORMS. Like, we have a very big activity in September, the soccer fundraiser and that tournament. We're going to open up the middle school at least a few times where alumni can come into the old ORMS, tour the building. We're definitely going to plan that for September. In talking with people are really excited about that in terms of coming into the building and see where they, learn from great teachers. So a lot of different activities. Again, we'll do that a few different times. One of the big takeaways, do you want to talk about that, Jim, in terms of some of the takeaways we learned from Dover in terms of the move that you shared with the group today?
Thank you. On the facility side, I'll be brief, and I'll address Jay's question. One of the terms that I've used quite often is that links well to the middle school is how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And we've already started eating because it's going to take many bites to get through this elephant. So on the facility side, I reached out to several schools that have experienced moves in the past couple of years, and I got some great advice, especially from Dover. I'm not going to go into those details, but in all the schools that I talked to, it's a little scary but also exciting that one of our unique challenges and hurdles we have to face is that this is going to be mid-year and not over the summer. So this carefully planning that has been a highlight. And however, those schools that have moved, even over the summer, they did it very, very quickly. They were very, very organized, and that is the information that I drew from. And I shared a lot of those. Well, me and Jay talked about that and shared them both together with the task force. And I think a lot of those were well received. I think everybody on the task force has received that loud and clear that this does have to be carefully managed and handled. Another thing on the facility side, which like what Dr. Morse alluded to, even though this is a long list, there's a lot happening between the lines. We're going to both be meeting with Bowen, our construction firm, about because they carry a moving budget, but it's nowhere near if we were just to pay a single mover to move the whole school. And there's like little hurdles that we just still need to work out. Like, even if we get started early and start taking bites out of that elephant, the interior of the building is not going to be completed, or elevators may not be completed at that time when we bring things over early, staging. So, these are just a lot of small problems or small concerns to figure out that will add into a more complete plan. So. But I do got to say, our custodians and maintenance are going to be doing the bulk, if not almost all the moving, except for like the teachers and other staff in the school. So all facility staff is already engaged. They know that this is coming. We've already been collecting boxes and pallets and tape and things for that, and just storing it at the school. So it's interesting to be prepared, and we've been already just informing the custodial maintenance staff, any ideas, anything that they think of that could be valuable, we'll definitely put to good use.
The last thing I want to mention is just in terms of sustainability. Our sustainability PLC worked last year. We've had discussions with teachers. Our goal is to recycle everything whenever possible. And then also in terms of like popular questions about, well, what are you going to do with the items you currently have in the ORMS that are still good? The first, we'll have a process. We'll work with the other district principals to talk about what their needs are internally, and items will go to our own district buildings when appropriate, and also we'll be reaching out to other outside schools that might be in need of furniture that we no longer need. It's not appropriate for our own school buildings. So the goal is to, be as sustainable as possible with that, and we were very successful. Jim did this, reached out to other facilities directors across the state in terms of when we tore down the gym, the padding, the basketball hoops, the scoreboard, that all went to districts that needed those items. So sustainability is the goal throughout this process. Glad to answer any questions you might have. Tom?
This is something I think Al brought up a long time ago. Do you see moving into the middle school an opportunity to rethink the daily schedule? I mean, I assume maybe when you move, you're probably going to stick pretty much to the schedule you already have, but at some point, does the new building allow you to reimagine the daily schedule?
Absolutely. Like a big piece, Tom, is when we talked about, I think someone had mentioned earlier tonight, maybe it was Ryan, like 2 lunches instead of 4 lunches, which we currently do. So having 2 lunches will free up our schedule to do things we've never been able to do. Just in terms of space, we talk about our advisory program. One of the biggest challenges with our advisory program, historically, what we wanted to break up into 2 small groups. For example, an advisor has 10 students. We've always been very challenged in terms of finding appropriate spaces for that. So yes, part of our task force goals are to look at the schedule, so when we open up fully, when everything's in place, including the outside elements like the field turf, is to look at our schedule and what improvements we can make, and also in terms of collaboration with the high school, try to facilitate making sure our schedules are somewhat similar to meet the needs of all of our students. So that's going to be a big task this year as well, Tom.
Good, thank you.
And I think you'll see that coming in the March, August timeframe, Tom, where Jay will articulate more clearly what he envisions the schedule to be.
No, good.
Phase 2, I would say.
Yeah.
Phase 2.
Yeah, great. Brian?
Yes, Brian.
Probably more of a question for Jim, but is there an opportunity to, since we're kind of fully back this year, to have maybe ORTV kind of start, our own internal television station, start covering the work that's going on there, and as we get close to opening, or, I know it's a high school program, but,
I think that's something that Rebecca can take to the advisor of ORTV and see if we can do some of that. I think that's a great idea. Certainly it's a community interest item.
Because I think I mentioned this before, there's actually 2 videos I found of the elementary school I grew up in that was knocked down to build a new one. And there were 2 videos made. One was basically the history of the school all the way up until, and how they named the new one. And the second one was actually a video of the last walkthrough through the school. And the last thing everyone got to do was, they each were handed a Sharpie as they came in. They were able to sign the tile wall before it got knocked down. And I could share it with everybody. It's too long to watch here, but I could share both these videos, and they're actually pretty interesting. I think it'd be something we might at least maybe turn into a project of somebody's that they could do, and I'd love to be able to share it with anybody to look at. But it's really going to be an emotional time when that happens. People don't realize, like, it's just a new school, but you'd be surprised, especially teachers that have worked there for 20 years plus, moving to a new school. It gets very emotional, and we're going to get a lot of press, I think, for this too, that we need to
I think it also opens up opportunities for mouth of the river, in terms of doing articles of like alumni interviews, like Jay Moriarty up in Madbury. He handed his dad the bricks to build the original school. What a cool story that would be, and start collecting those as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, Brian. We just need to wait for the students and the teachers to come back, and we'll broach it with them. I also just want to say, kudos to Jay and Jim for their emphasis on sustainability, because, a generation ago, that just would have been thrown in the dumpster. And, we continue, and Sue is key to this, continue to think about how we can help others. We may not have a need, but another district may have a need. And so Jim's reaching out to the facilities directors and their emphasis on how do we maximize the reuse of materials that could be beneficial to someone else is really a credit to both of them and our philosophy in the district on sustainability. So I just want to point that out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And the next piece on the agenda is our mitigation and response plan. So I do want to emphasize that this is work that Catherine has done for us in taking our narrative and trying to turn it into an operational plan that people would understand. And in particular, using the color-coded system of green, yellow, and red. That's a pretty traditional system that's being used nationally. And of course, sadly, we see ourselves in the red right now. And it was only the last board meeting that we switched from yellow to red. So I was watching the news just before I came over, and 99% of the COVID in the country right now is the Delta variant. It's really just completely taken over the country. And, I sent you all an article earlier about what was happening in the South and the Southwest. And so we really need to be thinking about COVID from a much bigger perspective than the town of Durham, Lee, and Medbury. So Catherine and the nurses participated in the latest information session by Dr. Chan. And we talked specifically about, how the state measures the virus. And although, we all want to be able to look and say, this is what's happening in our community, that's not how the state measures it. They're measuring it by county. And so when we updated this, we went from the metric that we were originally using to the metric that DHHS is now using. And so minimal transmission, which would be green, would be less than 50, and moderate transmission between 50 and 99, and substantial 100 or more. So sadly, that's where we are. And as you look at the next page where we talk about masking, I just want to make sure you understand that in both yellow and red, we would be recommending administratively that the board stay the course on masks. And basically, that's to protect our students. That more recent article, I think I sent you, you are seeing transmission among young students now. You are seeing transmission among adolescents now. And the young adults that were not part of the original COVID impact group, we're seeing a lot more impact there. So it's not to scare people. That's what the science is saying. That's what the doctors are telling us. And so when we talked about recommended, and I just want to clarify this in relation to green, what we're recommending is the conversation come back to the school board. We're not recommending that it go maskless, because you made the decision to go to masks. You have to make the decision to come out of masks. And the criteria that Catherine and I are recommending to you, so that this doesn't just happen like, oh, magically we're in green, so tomorrow we're maskless. It would be coming to you as a conversation if we have 2 consecutive periods of 14 days each in the green. So it doesn't happen overnight, it happens as a process. And when I was talking to Michael about the process in my mind, I was saying I do not like the idea of it's magically October 20th, so we're going to have that discussion. What I really want to do with your support is have Catherine or myself do a report on the metrics every single board meeting. Should take 3 minutes of our time. It's not designed to go into a long conversation. It's designed to say, this is where we are, world, and at the same time, we're telling our community where we are. And so, it will be a while before we will come out of red. It'll be a while before we come out of yellow. But if we are fortunate enough to hit green, then the clock starts ticking for a conversation at this body, 2 14-day cycles when that's completed. That really says to you that the virus is stabilized in our community. And so I really wanted to make that clear, because that's not as clear as I hoped it would be based on the conversations I got today. And I'll make that clear by putting an asterisk there and adding that language at the bottom of that page so there's no misunderstanding. Other than that, it really is a translation of the narrative that we've been talking about, and it's really a continuation of the work that we did last year. So, the answer to the question of when is that day that you all would have the conversation is built into this plan. So it doesn't require, in my mind, it doesn't require more than that. You may want more than that, and I'm certain, Catherine and I certainly will put it in, but I'm trying to keep this as simple and straightforward as possible so our community can look at it. They'll know in a given 2-week period, since we meet every other week, where we are as a school system, and there's clarity on what we would be doing in that particular circumstance. That was the goal of this. I'm hoping that it's that clear, and I'm certainly open to any questions or modifications that make sense to the body as a whole. But this isn't this has not been an adopted process. This is the administrative process for moving through the COVID cycle, and I'd be glad to answer questions or, hear suggestions. Al?
I think it's really good. First of all, I think why I like it better than what we went through last fall is that you're tying the metrics to what the actions are. Exactly. And so to clarify, because we had in public comments, someone said set a date. That's not how COVID works, sadly. It doesn't work that way, and it's not tied to science if you do it that way. So I think this is a much better way. It provides clarity to parents of what the matrix are, what the actions are, and how we get to those things. So I think it's really good.
Well, I think the comment said gates and not dates. So gates is exactly what you described and what we're moving towards, as in having these, these different stages on indicators. There are the two things that I would bring forward for this. While not so much changes, there's so much uncertainty, we reserve the right to change our mind as new information comes up. I would like a little bit more. I think the community also deserves a little bit more certainty that we would take these gates, this action, and maybe it's even just going around the table and say, based on what we know now, if we got to a green level, would the board support recommended masks indoors or masks optional? Because I don't think it's. We don't want to get ourselves into the situation of having that day come, hopefully it comes, and then just beginning a conversation about whether we would support masks optional at that green status. The other thing I wondered was whether there's a difference in vaccination eligibility. I know that many of our families, particularly at the elementary level, feel very strongly that masks should stay on because their children don't even have the option to get vaccinated. So one mitigation response level, one thing that could be built into the plan here is masks optional or masks recommended for the high school or for the grades that are eligible to be vaccinated. And in that case, we wouldn't go to masks optional at the elementary level until the vaccination is available to those ages.
Just in reaction to that, UC, I would never recommend to this body that we go mask optional without vaccination available for our 5 to 11-year-old or 3 to 11-year-olds. I think that is just irresponsible on my part if I were to do that. So I do see a distinction between, in the conversation at the time, I couldn't, with a straight face, ever recommend us going mask optional when our K through 4 and 5th and 6th graders largely are unvaccinated. I think the discussion does become about those who are vaccinated and those who are not.
So let's put that in here. Yep.
Well, if that's the consensus of the group, I'm certainly willing to do that.
Denise?
I do like your idea of, just because we may hit green on a particular day, like that doesn't, that I like your idea of having 2 of the 14-day cycles, so, giving us that much period of time, which is essentially a month, to be consistently green so that, it's not just this little fluke of, oh, it just came down, but then next week it's back up again. Because the last thing we want to do is change something and then have to change it back a week later. So I do like that idea of having an extended period of time to make sure that things are continuing to go in that direction.
Okay, Denise.
Brian?
Why wouldn't we have an option, though, if we reach a certain level for at least the high school to be optional, considering they can be vaccinated, the whole building? Why wouldn't that be? Why would we have to do the whole school district? I wasn't thinking that you would. I think that conversation, Brian, is something you guys need to have as a body. You've got to remember that we are now seeing the Delta variant transfer from vaccinated people to as well. So like the Texas governor had the vaccination and he still got COVID. And so that's part of the Delta piece. So that's all part of the conversation you'll have at that point. I don't think you anticipate that in the plan. It's part of where you are as a body when you start having the conversation.
The problem with waiting is that, there's such, there's anxiety in the community about this, and if we punt even having the discussion, it just brings it all up again. It would be, ideally, in my mind, we would say, if circumstances stay close to what they are now, this would be our plan. And then we can return whenever it happens and say, the first question is the situation, our circumstances, pretty similar to what they were on August, whatever it is? If so, let's follow that. And if not, then we'd have to reopen the hairy discussion.
Al?
So I want to clarify, because I think when you said date or dates, it kind of reinforces the problem I was trying to point out with the public comment. So the most pertinent date is 2 consecutive 14 in green.
That's what I mean.
And so the way transmission generally works, it's not like suddenly you go from red to green. And with a weekly report, you're going to begin to see a trend. And so by doing it weekly like that, we can begin to, again, as you move from red to yellow, you begin to talk about, okay, we've had 1 yellow. I think as we move to 1 green, that will then stimulate the trend that we're seeing, and then the conversation then naturally will come up. I think what Jim has done here, it already kind of spells out the action so the community knows what to expect. We're really looking for the trend line when we hit the first green. That then gives us 2 weeks out, theoretically, to the next council or the board meeting, that if we hit the green, we would be ready to say, you know what, consistent with what the administrative plan was, we could move to this. So I think it's a completely different scenario than last fall where you're talking about, do we go in or out? This one is mask or not mask with clearly defined matrix and clearly defined actions. So I think it's an easier mechanism for the community to understand. I think it's an easier mechanism for us to take action on. So again, I think it's really well done.
Al, are you saying then that it's a clearly defined action? So if we had those 4 weeks, it would be masks optional among cohorts that were vaccine eligible.
Yeah, I assume so. Why would you put what the actions are if you weren't going to follow
Well,
the
this
actions?
is where there's a little bit of discrepancy, because one approach is to open the discussion, and one is to say, we're assuming we're going to follow these clearly defined actions.
We are at a point right now where infection rates in New Hampshire and in Stratford County are about where they were at the start of November last year. So we're on a trend that is a couple months ahead of last year, but at the same kind of growth rates as we were seeing last year. It was 6 months from November 1st till we got back down to those levels. If we had tried to guess what the situation was going to look like now, 6 months ago, we would have been way off. The advice has changed substantially. The natural history of the disease has changed substantially. I think that if I was being asked to commit to a course of action to apply 6 months from now, I would have to take a more conservative path than I think I would want to take at the time. So if you ask me to draw a course now, the only common set of inputs that we have is the CDC type guidance, which is not nuanced like this. It is wear masks, end of story, in schools. So I guess I'm really hesitant to commit to a specific path forward beyond a let's reopen the conversation when we get to a certain point, because I think the situation will have changed. There'll be other new information, whether it's related to vaccine boosters or other variants or another therapy that changes the situation in a different way. And so I guess I'm really hesitant to draw a firmer line.
I mean, I think we're going to have a long, again, the trend, I mean, we're at, again, the last I looked, it's like 283 cases over 14 days. We're not even close to the, I mean, we're so far over the red right now, it's not even close. And the trend is in an upward arc. So again, I think there will be, when we do finally start coming down, we'll get a better sense of what's going on. I mean, again, I remind you at graduation, we were all sitting out without masks, sitting around the field, and things have remarkably changed in a matter of weeks of how we've come. So I agree with Michael. I don't know where we're going to be in 6 months, or where we're even going to get down to where we hit 50 to 99 cases over 14 days. But I think there will be an opportunity as the trend line comes down where we begin to reevaluate. Even before, I mean, before we get to the 50, we're going to have a sense, I think, that we're coming down. It'll give us at least a heads up that when we're going to get to that point, that we're able to take action. I hope.
I do think these are in the right ballpark. You know, it's you know, every organization is using a different baseline, right? The denominator is different here, a 14-day window versus a 7-day window versus a 7-day average. This is just for comparison, this is about 3 to 3.5 times the threshold that we had in the memo last meeting a couple weeks ago. So it's a little bit higher. But when you're talking about something that grows exponentially, that's probably not that big a difference.
And part of the logic there was that the conversation with the body was, were we too rigid? And I tried to find, and Catherine did a great job with this, find a barometer that we could use that is being used more commonly across New Hampshire. So Michael's absolutely right. If you compare this to what we were using in the spring, this is a looser criteria, but it's not wacky loose. It's based on DHHS guidance and what other school systems are doing. And so we tried to get into the mainstream and not be so conservative that we would never have the conversation. This will get us to a conversation based on history that Michael shared, you know, maybe 6 months down the road, because this isn't going to turn around tomorrow.
And I certainly hope it's sooner than that, but that's, if we follow last year's trajectory, that's where we fall.
Yep.
Denise?
Well, and then we're going, the screening that we're going to do is another whole, you know, we haven't had that data at all up till now.
Right.
So that could be huge if, you know, all of a sudden we're finding tons of asymptomatic, you know, positivity. I mean, that's going to really make a big difference, and we might have to, you know, we might want to incorporate that data into this as well once we have enough. So
if you incorporate that data, though, you have to incorporate the data of the testing, how many false positives, how many positive negatives
Yeah.
and everything else, because
Absolutely, but, I mean, we have
nothing
none of
is-
that
nothing
now
is-
whatsoever, is just my point.
nothing's exact.
Well,
If you
that
want-
data
the
gets
more issues you bring into it, though, the more complicated the decision gets. So,
That data will get incorporated automatically, though, because any positive test result gets reported to the state, gets
Right.
reported to CDC. So
That's true.
those tests
It'll go into our county
will
data.
Right,
show up in the
positivity
county data.
rate. Okay,
Yep.
got it.
And in fact, go ahead, Catherine.
No, it goes in the data, and Michael's right, it does get reported, and that's recorded for our county.
And we want high participation rate. In fact, I had wondered whether having participation rate as one of our indicators would be helpful, because the more people participate, the lower our risk is overall.
Participate in what? You're
In the
saying?
UNH testing program.
I guess we probably get to get that undergoing before we establish baseline data, so.
So my concern is adding it to this matrix is we're going to make it more complicated than it needs to be. What we're trying to do is look at the two constant pieces of data we have, and those are the two constant pieces of data we have. On the sheet that I'm working with Dr. Harvey on, we're making some adjustments to the flow of that sheet that you'll see every week. And so we could add that layer in there where we're putting because we're going to have to look at staffing still, and then we can add in the piece around looking at our surveillance testing and how that incorporates into a weekly update for you, so you can see how that coincides with the other data we have. But putting it into this matrix makes it very complicated because it's an opt-in program. So it's only the data you're going to have are the people who are willing to do it, and we just don't know that yet.
And we can show it on the other data stream.
Makes sense. You know, I don't want
Thank you,
to drag this on. One, because I think we're ending up in the same place where this is an awesome matrix. And it has gates, it has action. What we heard from, we did learn a lot over the last year when the school year started, there actually were districts that had some sort of matrix with thresholds. And I'm sure they tweaked them a little bit over the course of the year as more knowledge came, but they had that framework for this is when we would be remote, this is when we would be hybrid, this is when we would go in person. And similarly, we're hearing from, a group in the community that wants some assurance that when we finally get to that stage, if the board feels it is safe in a situation, if they're not, if it were today, that we would allow masks optional for low transmission. So, we don't need to go around the table, though that might be nice, but just to have the reassurance that we're not going to get to that point, have no major changes in information about the virus, and then still say, for vaccine eligible kids, we're not going to have, we're going to still require masks. And just one final thing, Denise, you mentioned having it go on and off again and not wanting the whiplash of changing policy. This is so less significant than going from remote to hybrid. It's a matter of classroom policy of putting masks on and off again. And I know that it can be confusing for kids and for the staff, but at a particular age, it makes sense where, this week we're going to wear our masks. It's not, I think the transition costs for that are low enough that we shouldn't hold up a transition just because we're afraid it might flip back again 3 weeks later.
Other discussion? All right.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the conversation and the compliments on the matrix. I really do want to give credit to Catherine. She really did a great job of putting the plan into an operational document. And we'll make the adjustment on the recommendation that I talked about, and then we'll publish this on the website tomorrow. So we'll take care of that immediately. All right.
right,
I
thanks.
think that got me through my part.
Excellent. All right, let's work through the business administrator section, and then we'll probably take a short recess.
Given you an update on the budget for last year by each category, major category, and I made a little few notes on the bottom there for some of those balances. Once we take out the encumbrances and the transfer to the solar panels, we'll be right at around 900,000 in terms of fund balance. Any questions? Okay. Moving on to the budget calendar, I think we set all of these dates, but we really didn't get this approved by the school board, so that's why it's back to you again. I think you've already seen this.
We just need a motion to
We just
approve
need a
the
motion
calendar.
to approve it. Of note, the workshop is on October 28th, our annual budget workshop, and then the other dates for the deliberative session and voting by ballot, those are all included on the calendar.
Brian?
Motion to approve the budget calendar as presented.
Motion from Brian.
Second.
From Denise. The only thing I would note here is that we will just be getting the inputs to drive the goal-setting process, in the run-up to the September 15th meeting. That'll be the first time that the board will have talked about that. The Finance Committee will not have talked about that. So if we're comfortable setting a goal that meeting, great, but I think there's a good likelihood that we don't end up setting that goal until the October, whatever the first meeting in October is. And I don't think that's problematic to the process if that works out that way, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that'll work.
Yeah. All right, other discussion? All in favor of the budget calendar? 7 in favor, that's approved.
Thank you. And then we're also looking for approval of our bus lease.
Yes, it's 3.5%, 5 years for two 77-passenger buses. Questions?
Brian?
Motion to approve the bus lease.
We have a motion? Second from Denise?
I'll second.
Questions for Sue? All those in favor? 7 in favor, the bus lease is approved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
All right. How do folks feel? Do we take a short break, or do you want to plow through the rest of the agenda? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. All right, we're back. Our next item is the Finance Committee report. Is there a Finance Committee report?
We don't have anything, but we haven't done like, no, the facilities later, no.
The Finance Committee has not met since the last
No,
time.
no.
Last board meeting. All right. And then that brings us to the unanimous consent agenda. So I will move the unanimous consent. Oh, wait. Anybody want to remove anything from unanimous consent before I do that? Nope. Okay. I will move the unanimous consent agenda, including the motion to approve Mohammed activity stipend for the 2021-22 school year, and a motion to approve the high school maternity leave of absence from August 26th through November 26th.
I will second.
Second from Denise. All in favor? 7 in favor. The unanimous consent items are approved. All right. So the next item is discussion of policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings. And you have in the backup some notes that I had written about public participation, about our public comment policy, essentially, and a suggestion that we also create a procedure document to go with that. And the goal here really is to ensure that the voices of Oyster River constituents and our Barrington tuition constituents are heard, and that we have the ability to both do that and make sure that we can run an efficient meeting for the rest of the business that we have to do. So I think that there's some opportunity here to limit public comment to our constituencies. And at the same time, I was looking for some procedural support to make it easier for myself and potentially for future chairs to consistently manage the time in public comments when we have more people than we have time for reasonably. And so you have got my notes, and I think at this point it would be to collect the input from the rest of the board if that's the right course of action, or if there's a much different course of action, and then refer it to the policy committee for work. So, Brian.
I did see at the end of the notes, you mentioned something about either excluding teachers or not excluding. I'm not sure how I'm reading this.
So what I was clarifying is that and I had this discussion with Jim too, so clearly I didn't write this very well. Basically what I'm trying to say is that the privilege of a staff member of speaking at public comment is not affected by the fact that they're a staff member. So if they are a resident of Durham, Lee, Madbury, or Barrington, they're welcome to speak at public comment. If they're not, if they're a staff member that lives in another town, then their avenues for communication with the board are other normal staff.
You mean in your proposal?
In my proposal, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just add too, that legally we can't make an exception for teachers out of, we can't say like only members of our district and Barrington, and then say, except teachers. According, if I read the legal opinion, we can't legally do that, is the way I read that. I'm not sure if we clarified that or not.
I think that's the case.
And I believe that this came up many years ago when probably Alan.
It was the first meeting of the board.
So I don't know if Alan, I think Tom was on the board then. I don't remember if Al was or not. I was certainly not on the board at the time.
It's a different issue I'm talking about, though. The issue I'm talking about is if it has nothing to do with the fact that they're teachers and whether they can speak or not because they're teachers. The issue is we can't make an exception. If we say only residents of our district and Barrington can speak, we can't make an exception for certain groups, is the way I read the legal.
I'm following you now.
But you could still, somebody who's not a member, because there was one case I remember where somebody spoke, and I allowed this person to speak, and he was not a member, he's not a resident. And according to your plan, I think this person could speak, but they'd have to get permission from you in advance to speak. It wouldn't preclude it, right?
Jim put some of this out to Dan Goro, to council for advice, and the advice was, if I understand correctly, that we shouldn't do that, essentially.
Oh, you should, okay, I thought maybe things you should.
That was my initial proposal, but.
Okay.
But to both Tom and Denise's point, I think I'm on target now, Denise. And Michael and I have had this conversation. So say the board wants to hear from the guild, And in this case, the guild president lives in Maine. If it's on the agenda, the president can speak to the board because you reserve space for that to happen. So we're not, Michael nor I are trying to exclude our staff's voice, but we would structure it into the agenda so we could hear it.
But not public.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that would go for any agenda item that the speaker was not a resident of the district.
I think it's really important that not only those with titles, but any of our staff are able to address the board in a public forum with minimal barriers. And so it sounds like some inquiry has been done already, but really, it doesn't make sense to me why we can't, as a board policy, say only residents of these communities or our staff can address the board.
So the opinion from our attorney is if you make an exception for any non-resident person, whether they're staff members or not, then it has to apply to everyone. You can't make a singular exception. So the workaround is to provide an opportunity for the staff to speak to us and in the agenda if we want to. And obviously we do. We always want to hear from the staff. But they wouldn't do it in public comment. They would do it during a prescribed agenda item.
So public comment, staff comment.
Yeah. So what's happening, and has happened in the state, and it made the front pages of the paper, is people from outside a school system are coming in and then using public comment to disrupt a board meeting. And what we want to make sure is we're clear that Oyster River residents, Oyster River residents who live who are staff members, Barrington tuition paying members have access to us, and that they don't lose access because the room fills up like it did in Exeter with non-residents. And instead of having an opportunity to hear from people who are paying the bills, they heard from people who didn't even live in the state. And so essentially what we're trying to do is structure it in a way that can't happen here. And, and I did talk briefly with Janet to assure her that this isn't being designed to shut down our employee voice. That's the last thing we want to do, but it is to shut down people from outside the system disrupting a duly authorized meeting of this school board.
Al?
So the one area that I have concern with, I would say, is individuals speaking during public comments may not delegate or assign their time to another individual. So I've had the privilege of sitting through 9.5 years of public comments on the school board, 5.5 years on the town council, and I kid you not, I listened to 1 hour and 20 minutes of public comments Monday. The reason I have a problem with this, there have been rare cases where there have been older individuals or people who haven't been able to come here and they've asked somebody to read. It's a really, really rare exception to the rule, but I think it's important to allow them to do that. I think the other thing with the sequential thing where people read what happened to the last thing, I would throw that under suggestions about effective public comments to those people. That is, I think people when they do public comments and I know they're nervous, you're coming up to the podium, you've never done it before, you're on TV and it's difficult, and so the fallback is you want to write this thing up and then read from it, and it's a really ineffective way to do public comments, and it's doubly ineffective if it's over the 5 minutes and you keep delegating it. And so, again, it's a really rare thing that happens. I can't think maybe more than 10 times I've seen that in the collective nearly 15, 16 years I've seen it. So what I would say to those people is, look, paraphrase it. If you're going to do that and you've sent it to us and it's come to us, paraphrasing it is much more effective than trying to reading it and cutting your message up. So again, we on the school side have limited our public comments to like 30 minutes or whatever. On the town side, it's been more open-ended. And I've literally sat up to 2 hours and listened to public comments with really controversial issues. And I don't think that's an issue here. I've never seen it where people are like, haven't been able to speak public comments. We've adjusted the time of public comments from 3 minutes down to 1.5 minutes to try to get everybody in. So I feel like this is kind of over, it's like we're regulating something that isn't an issue, and I don't see the need to do it, honestly. So I would prefer that we scratch that one.
So the scenario that I was thinking about when I wrote that is a group of people coming in and all saying, I'm going to ask Al to speak. I say I'm going to ask Al to speak my behalf, and then Denise says she'd like Al to speak on her behalf, and then Tom does the same thing, and pretty soon Al's talking for 15 minutes. And not that I don't want you to talk for 15 minutes. But
I literally have never seen that happen in 15 years of public comments. So while it could happen, I've never seen it happen. What happens is it's that sequential letter. There's a group that gets together, they write a thing that they send to us. They want to get it written in to the minutes, and so they're coming up there and it's long, and then the first person does it, then the second person carries on, the third person carries on. And that's what's happening. And again, that comes back to the suggestion I'm making, which is so the scenario you've proposed, again, I've never seen. Mm-hmm. The scenario I'm proposing, I have seen. Mm-hmm. And again, I think, what would be helpful to people really as we do this policy is, and I'm not trying to tell people what to say, but just some suggestions about public comments, that you only have 3 minutes. It's more effective if you're able to stick within the 3 minutes, that, if you have a, long thing that's 160 people that are signed on to it, that you get kind of one person to paraphrase it. And I think that, I hope that would solve what is an infrequent problem.
So for me, the most important things here, because I know there's a lot here. I try to kind of put everything in that I would think of, so that I didn't surprise anybody later on. But I did actually think of one more thing, because I watched your public comments from the Durham Town Council.
Yeah, you have to have a public hearing.
And we do have to have a public hearing to change this. But one thing that happened as part of why the Durham Town Council public comment took as long as it did this week was that it was not just public comment where members of the public were sharing their opinions with the council. The council was engaging in dialogue with those members of the public. And that's something we have not done traditionally. Occasionally there's been a response, but that would be something else that I would probably suggest that we write into either policy or procedure that's not.
So again, I've been thinking about that actually for a couple of days, and it was a mistake, because in that case, so the public comments, we kind of messed up the agenda. So what really it should have been, we should have opened up a public.
Oh, that's
hearing.
what you're saying. Got it.
Yeah. So if we get ourselves into that kind of situation, and I hope we never do, that in this case, we were having information come back from the dam, and so people, rather than opening a public hearing for that section, we were trying to handle it during public comments, which is a misuse of public comments. We don't want to do that.
So what's really important to me here are two things. One is, based on what we've seen, statewide and in other nationally, I think it's important to limit the privilege of public comment speaking to our constituents, the people that elected us, and the people that are part of the Oyster River school system. So Durham, Lee, Madbury, and it's actually part of our tuition agreement with Barrington that Barrington families also have that privilege as well. So I think that is the most important thing to me. The second most important thing about this is to provide some guidance, predictability to those who are coming to public comment, that, hey, normally it's 3 minutes, but if a whole bunch of people show up, you're not going to get 3 minutes. Yeah. Because I know that when I get up here and I say, you're going to have 1.5 minutes, you're going to have 2 minutes, and because I did this when I was in that role. I have it written down and I timed it out, so I know how long it's going to take me to read this. So knowing that you've got something controversial coming up, that there's going to have be more than a small number of people here, now I know that I'm probably not going to have 3 minutes to cover it. So those are the two things. If we,
I think those are two.
If we got everything else,
I think that's great.
But I think that goes back to, like, again, Mike, when we finish the policy, if we can, and I know it's not the policy, but if we can just have, and I'm trying to say, like, public comment suggestions, just because people who come here, when they come to a controversial thing, they may never have ever done public comments before in their life. And so if we can give them some.
So we do that in the brochure that we put out, but during COVID times, we haven't put out the brochure. Next board meeting will be in the library again, and we'll have those brochures and the agendas out. And I think that makes perfectly good sense, Al. I do want to piggyback on something you said that I do think is important, and that is, if a resident, due to age or illness, can't come in and they document that they live at, 23 Main Street in Durham, then having somebody read their comments, I think I think would be appreciated. I agree with that, because that periodically does happen. So I think that exception should be made.
I was just going to try to make sure that the third component of employee comments, it might not find its way into this policy, but that it's considered jointly, whether it's adding a new section to the agenda or some other approach.
When the staff comments were controversial, when that issue came up a number of years ago, I believe that the issue was that there is a separate policy that governs staff board communications. And that policy was being used to exclude a staff member who was a resident of the district from speaking at public comment on the basis of their staff position. That saying, no, you're a staff member, you should be going through your principal or your department head or whatever to communicate rather than public comment. So that's, to me, that's not an, if somebody is a resident of the district, doesn't matter what their role is within the school district. If they're a resident of the district, they should have the privilege of speaking here. Tom, were you going to say something? Or Denise, was it?
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just going to share a quick thought on something we've talked about. I appreciate the discussion because I hadn't thoroughly thought it through. The piece on the individuals delegating or assigning their time to another individual. Though it hasn't happened, I think there's a lot of things happening routinely now that haven't happened. So I'm on board with the idea of being in front of that should it happen. B, as I read this, I don't think it prohibits someone from coming in and reading a statement, a letter, observations on behalf of someone who has asked them to do that. Because once the chair acknowledges and gives a person an opportunity to make public comment, it's up to that individual to do with that period of time what they want to do. If they want to read a letter on behalf of a neighbor, they can do that. So as I read this, I don't think it prohibits that. And I agree with you. I think that's something that we should allow and encourage.
You could have it as a sequential, so no speaker, including a designated speaker, may address the board more than once, something like that.
I would also add that this is an important way that the board receives input, but it is far from the only way that the board receives input. And there's nothing to prevent anybody from anywhere in the world from sending us an email or calling the SAU office or whatever to provide input in other ways. Denise.
I just was wondering if it might be helpful to share the lawyer's, Diane's letter with the board so that everyone can see that information.
As you get a communication from the attorney, it's attorney-client privilege, so it's for your eyes. I don't generally put them out, but I'd be glad to share Diane's. Both Michael and I kind of went, we were reading it because it's a very legalese document, but we'd be glad to share.
All right. So are we comfortable with this going to policy for some further work then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. And then Jim, the regional K-8 virtual school plan.
Yeah, so I'm sad to say that after months of working with Florida Virtual School, they were, in the end, unwilling to meet the requirements of a public school system as it relates to special education students. We worked with them all summer, and, it seemed like it was going in the right direction, and then I got a list of very specific questions, and again, Catherine was there for me, and we went through, and you know, some of the questions were easily resolved, but the questions that were not easily resolved. So as a public school, we have to provide access to all students, and we have to provide FAPE to our special needs students. And part of that is Catherine's staff's ability to observe a lesson being taught. So Florida Virtual School said, no, you can't observe our lessons. Another fundamental issue was the ability of their staff to accommodate and modify based on an IEP, and they were not willing to accommodate or modify. And so those two issues just crashed and burned the proposal. I really feel bad about it because we spent a lot of time on it. It looked really good. The state was willing to support it in a funding way, but Florida Virtual Schools was not willing to accommodate our special need population, and therefore we can't use them. And that's the end of that. So the two options for our parents are VLAX, of course, and VLAX is a charter school, and it's independent of us. And they have put together a K-4 program. One of our parents was talking about how well it worked last year to me. And then homeschooling. And just to be clear, in homeschooling, we don't divorce ourselves of our homeschooled families. We are willing to support them. The support is if a homeschooled family, for example, wanted to have their child come in for music lessons, we do that. If a homeschool family wanted to use our materials and we have it on hand, we've done that. What we don't do is provide access to a classroom teacher because they're homeschooling. And we don't allow a homeschooled family to direct access the counseling or psychologist staff. So we try to be as accommodating to our homeschool family as we possibly can, and we will continue to do that. And it'll be interesting as we open school, you know, how many homeschool families we have, because they are under no obligation by law to inform us. I did get a form this week from a parent who has chosen to homeschool, and she said it's part of the state regulations, but it's the first time I've seen that form. New Hampshire is incredibly liberal in terms of homeschool accountability. So essentially they don't even have to inform me they're homeschooling, they just have to inform the commissioner. Now, most families do inform me, and I appreciate that because it helps us get a better understanding of our enrollment. It also gives me the opportunity periodically to reach out and say, so tell me, you know, what's going on in the homeschooling situation. And, you know, families have very specific reasons. Some of them are religious. You know, you'll see families leave for religious reasons. Some of them are convenience. You know, they work in a particular area and it's much easier for their child to go to school in the private school, for them to homeschool. So there's lots of reasons why families do. Sometimes people just aren't happy with us. I mean, that's the reality of a public school system. Generally speaking, it's been, you know, someplace in the 50-60 range that we have homeschooled. But I just want to emphasize that we don't wash our hands of them because we totally expect they'll come back at some point. You know, parents are comfortable usually in the primary grades, sometimes into the middle school, but by the time they hit high school, it's not unusual for homeschool families to reach out and say, we'd like to have our child join the system at this point. So it works to our favor to be supportive of the homeschooled families, and we try to be as much as we possibly can. So I'm sorry for that news, because that's kind of a big bummer after weeks and weeks of working on it.
All right. And that brings us back to the subject of the public hearing at the beginning of the meeting, the proposal to utilize the Facilities Development Capital Reserve Fund to fund the air conditioning upgrade for the science labs here at the high school building. So
the suggestion at the last meeting is that the board release $200,000 of the capital fund so that we can bring the air conditioning work over to the science wing. That still leaves us with $250,000 plus or minus in that account. We also traditionally, when we've gone forward and used funds, we usually tie the motion in that we will attempt to replace those funds in the in the following year, either through fund balance or to budget for them, so that we can keep an emergency fund, relatively robust. So what we're asking administratively is if the board would consider releasing $200,000 so that we can do the science wings in the science lab area and get that air conditioning done concurrently with the third floor of the tower.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the use of $200,000 from the Facilities Development Capital Reserve Fund for the high school air conditioning project.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Brian and a second from Al. Jim, if we did want to replenish those funds, would that require a warrant article? Sue says yes.
From fund balance, yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, one key thing here was looking at the balance of that fund. Initially, when we started talking about this, I thought it was a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty comfortable that there's going to be enough left there to address any urgent need that would arise if we run into some surprise over the course of the year. So
I got a question. Do we have to have a warrant if we want to, so we have theoretically, if we don't use the emergency funds and we wanted to increase the emergency funds, do we need to have a warrant for that? So in theory, rather than replenishing the capital reserve or whatever the heck the name of that fund was, we could just add to the emergency fund, and that would still allow it would give us more flexibility, actually.
All right, other discussion? All those in favor? 7 in favor.
Thank you.
All right, and then the last item under this section is consideration of a board resolution about teaching about race, and I've asked Tom to introduce this.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you followed the permutations of the divisive concepts law, which changed over the course of the year. And the final version of it, divisive concepts, was taken out of it, and a lot of the more egregious elements have been taken out of it, but it still gives the possibility of a complaint that would go to, I think, the State Board of Education.
Go 3 different places.
3 different places.
Yeah.
And could possibly lead to somebody losing their license. So there's this kind of penalty hanging over teachers. But if you read I've read through the final version, it's hard to figure out quite what would constitute violation of that law. So there's a kind of nebulous law with a really severe penalty that could arise if you violated this nebulous law. And so I'm wondering whether the board would be interested in having a resolution, and I would see it something quite simple, affirming what's already in our policy about the importance of teaching about race and its role in American history and culture, and also that we are willing to support teachers who do that, so that if some frivolous lawsuit comes against them for showing 12 years as slaves or something, they have our backing. But I assume that we could coordinate that with the ACLU, which is also interested in that. I'm sure we could coordinate this with their union so that there's this support, there'll be support for them, rather than just letting this thing float. Because I think there's a danger with this thing out there that you might just become cautious, and you don't want to be hung out to dry and have to have legal expenses because you've done something that is totally legitimate and totally appropriate. So I just wonder if the board would be interested in like a short resolution consistent with our policy, affirming the importance of this kind of teaching and affirming that we will stand behind teachers who are legitimately teaching race and somehow find themselves in some kind of legal entanglement because of that. So that's what.
Why are we limited to just race? Why wouldn't we include any other topics? Why are we kind of going narrow on it?
Well, I think you're right, Brian. The way the language is written, it's also about gender and sexuality and so forth. And I think
religion,
that-
things like that, so that's my thought.
Yeah.
So, again, this is, I think it's a good idea. I think the problem with this is it's like a misdirection. So, I think it's important for our community. So, when the divisive concepts have come out and the continuous discussion of critical race theory has come out, I think what's lost is what we actually are doing. And I think that's what parents are. What are you actually doing and what's in your curriculum? So I'm fine with the resolution saying we support the teachers and we support this work, but I think it's really, really important that we explain to our community exactly what our work is and what we're doing, so that they're clear that what we're doing is not the things that are the divisive concepts, because we're not, I don't think. I mean, the law is vague, but that's not our intent. And I think it's important for people to understand that in our community, and I think it will help facilitate what we're trying to achieve, because the worst thing to do is to do the misdirection and muddy the waters, and no one knows what we're doing, and they're in fear. And I think so it's a real opportunity for us to clarify. And I think, the work that your committee has done, really that work needs to come out to the community of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think this is a good opportunity for us.
So you know, as a board, I am in conversation with our teachers about putting on a forum very similar to what we did with the Asian American Pacific Islander Forum, where we would have a speaker and then have staff and student work presented, and then our staff doing mini presentations on their work at their level, and then having an open forum for community to ask questions. So it's very much along the lines that we're hoping to achieve.
I just want to, I totally agree with this concept. I've been thinking about it for a long time too. One of the things that I want to be cautious about is that although I want to extend to our teachers a very strong message of support, that we not oversell that we acknowledge any limitations that we can be aware of in terms of what we can realistically and legally do on their behalf. And I don't even know if we know that answer. One thing I know is there are so many unanswered questions with this incredibly poorly written legislation that there don't seem to be answers to. And the unfortunate reality that I think I've heard from our council is that some of these questions may only end up being answered in court. Mm-hmm. And, I think even if we just acknowledge that, I think we owe it to our teachers to be open and honest about the reality of this situation. With that said, I want to support doing anything and everything we can do to support any one of our teachers or a number of teachers who face the consequences of this bill.
I think that
Go ahead.
this sense of what can we as a board do to protect our teachers who are trying to teach many different groups' stories instead of sort of a single story in history, and to build critical thinking skills and the ability to have empathy and to listen to one another and develop one's own sense of agency in the world. It's right on, and it's been disheartening to see laws that are trying to, or that are going in a different direction to the work that the district has done for over 5 years now. I wonder about a resolution and what other tools we have, and wanting to make sure that that we're doing what we mean to do. We did just pass anti-racism policy. As Brian says, I think it is important to, I don't personally feel that in addition to that policy, we need a resolution that is solely focused on race. If it were in response to the budget language, I would want it to be on all of the groups and sort of protected groups that were identified there. And I also want to be, we need to support our teachers and show them the confidence in their work and in their intent, because some teachers are feeling that almost attacked, like you're wanting to brainwash and harm my child. And so we should make that message clear. We should also double down and communicate the policies that we do have around around racism, around transgender, again, around a lot of these areas. And I know, Dr. Morse, you have a letter that's drafted to the community that, that does that. We need to really understand the law and to work with our teachers and consultants to develop tactics that will protect them, whether it's statements on each lesson plan, or just being really explicit about the objectives of each lesson, to be around building critical thinking rather than to learn that one group is inferior or superior to another. All these things, I think we are supporting and really giving the direction to Dr. Morse to do at the utmost. So, what do you, is a resolution helpful to add to the work that you're already doing?
Yeah, I do think it's helpful, and I think that, in my conversations with teachers, even today, I walked in on Rebecca's task force meeting, and they actually just stopped the task force work and looked at me and said, thank you. Thank you for your words in the paper. Thank you for the words that you've been stating in public. Thank you for the board being so supportive of us. But the bottom line is, for all of the support we're providing them, our teachers are scared. And statewide, where they don't have this kind of public body support, they're so fearful that they are going to do exactly what Tom alluded to, which is just shut down and try to stay out of trouble. And so it's going to impact the quality of the work that happens. I think that a public statement by the board, and I certainly would want to make sure whatever draft we ran by our attorneys, but a public statement by the board of support of our work, because our work does not include critical race theory. Our work is about raising everybody, and nobody is being denigrated in the process. It's about really a love and support of all of our children. And, teaching history, you only grow from what you know. And if you don't know it, then you just continue to repeat patterns that are destructive. Our teachers are teaching great history. Our teachers are engaging in wide uses of curriculum by people of color. None of this is a violation of the law. Clearly, it's not a violation of law. The Attorney General's opinion is that it would not be a violation of the law. So I think that, I would use, I can't remember who used it now, but somebody at the podium, maybe it was Misty. I remember who it was now. It was Misty. We are so blessed to have this body and to have your support for the work that we're doing. And the work that we've done is so good for all of our children. So I think a public statement of support by this body would carry a lot of weight throughout our faculty and staff, because, they are really groundbreaking in this area for New Hampshire, not for, other areas of the country. And, people have requested our policies and used our teachers for guidance and support, and so I think that Tom's on the mark in terms of a statement, but I do think we should vet the statement, because I know where Dan is heading. So yes, we're going to support the work we're doing, and we're going to support you wholeheartedly, but people make mistakes, and so we have to be careful about that, or somebody might say, I'm going to test this law deliberately. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure the work that we're doing holds the kind of integrity that's held for 5 years and continues to grow, and we support our staff and our students. So I like the idea.
Denise?
Do we need a motion to Because, I mean, if we need a motion,
Usually, when you've asked any one member of the body to do something, you usually do it through a motion.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that Tom write a resolution addressing, what is the HB 2?
Yeah, the language in HB 2.
The language of HB 2.
We have a motion from Denise. A second from UC?
And I can share it with people, as people.
Right, and bring it back
Yeah.
here, right.
Yeah, no, just publish it in the paper.
So we'll take it up. We'll take it up when you've got it ready for.
Next meeting.
Yeah, the next meeting, okay. Very good.
And the sense is, that I'm hearing is that it shouldn't be just about race is one of the protected categories, but there are all these other protected categories, and essentially to make it inclusive of all those categories. Is that right? Yep.
And just to clarify, my understanding of your motion is that we are authorizing Tom to bring a draft back to us for ultimate consideration and approval.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Use that language, that's
And
good.
I think, it's like, what does it mean, a question would probably have to, what does it mean we're going to support them? Does it mean that if a legal case is brought against them, we would provide some legal help for them? And I think this is the kind of question you're talking about, Dr. Morse.
Right, so the law...
We don't want this just to be an empty kind of thing.
Right. So the law requires, if it happens at the building level, Jay would have, it was just the middle school, Jay would have to do an investigation, come to a conclusion. I would have to do an investigation and come to the conclusion. My report would go to the state or the court or, I can't remember the division of state government, but, and then, in my conclusion, if I find that it was not in violation of the law, then I think that's when we step in and say, okay, so where does this go next? And we need to provide, are we going to provide support for this teacher? I think that's a legitimate thing for us to be doing. If we have a law that is curtailing good teaching, and the investigation is the teacher was teaching the concepts along the line that usually was talking about, I have the lesson. This is what happened several years ago with 12 Years a Slave. The teacher had awesome lesson plans, awesome outcomes, had nothing to do with indoctrination. It had to do with the history of slavery. It was graphic and it was unsettling, but it wouldn't have been a violation of this law. And that teacher gave me tons of documentation. So it was an easy situation. It wasn't an easy situation, but it was, the documentation was so thorough that I was able to come to a conclusion relatively easily.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion to authorize Tom to draft a resolution that would come back to the board on September 1st for consideration.
Can we push the date off a little bit so that Tom and I have a chance to work it together and get it vetted and all of that?
2 meetings?
Yeah.
Second meeting in September?
Okay.
I think there wasn't actually a date in your motion. I added that out of my...
Oh, you did? Sly guy.
All right, so further discussion, questions?
We don't have did anybody second?
UC seconded it.
Oh, okay.
All right, all in favor? 7 in favor. Thanks, Tom. All right, so that brings us to committee updates. Are there committee updates?
I could just continue the conversation that we were on. The committee, the Superintendent's Committee for Equity and Anti-Racism is hosting a barbecue. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Superintendent's Office, for teachers who are on the committee and as well as the others. So that will be a nice way to bring back and focus this work, again, to show the community's support and the board's support for the work that the teachers are doing. And Jim, we've talked about, just for watchers tonight, it can seem a little bewildering, but there will be, as we learn more about the law and have the chance to see how it's put into practice, in September or October, there'll be a further whether it's the event that you discussed with Al that's similar to a forum and teachers presenting how they teach, or attorneys coming in and describing to the community, there will be ways for the community to understand more about HB2 and all this good stuff that we've been talking
Yeah.
about.
So, the idea here is, I think Michael started it back last spring where we wanted to get some forums in so we could have public discussions around issues, and that's a priority of the board. And, I thought that, the AAPI forum was a great model. We had great participation by the community. And I'd like to have that kind of themed public forum where people can come in and have those kind of discussions with us and really get a sense of what we're doing. I think, Al really hit it dead on, that there's a lot of language out there that is being used that is really just not very representative of the work that we do. And so I think that's part of our mission this fall, is to have that kind of conversation with the community.
Other committee updates? All right. The future meeting dates are noted here. Please note, everybody here and everybody watching, if you plan to come to the next meeting, it's not going to be in the auditorium. We are moving back down to the high school library for the next several months. So.
I was going to say the good news is it won't be like in the past where we had it like in Mohammed and we showed up here at the high school like, oh, where is everybody? At least we're just down the hallway.
I've never done that.
That has never happened. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over public comment. Do we have any public remaining? No. Okay. All right. And after we adjourn, we do have a brief non-meeting regarding strategy with respect to collective bargaining. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
From Al, second by Brian. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you all.